our baby boy Theo has finally made his entrance into this world, and now I am ready to share his birth story and how our first few weeks together have been. I'm Dr. Sam Ellis, and I'm a board-certified dermatologist. I'm here to help you understand your skin and find products that work for you, and occasionally give you a glimpse into my personal life, which is what we're doing today. If you like what you see, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. For those of you that are new here or don't follow me on Instagram, this was my first pregnancy, and I just feel like there is so much intensity built up around going into labor and birth. Even though I'm a physician and have spent a ton of time in hospitals and have even delivered many babies, I still felt like birth was such an intimidating situation. Like, you know, the baby needs to make its way out of you, but the prospect of actually making that happen is like, whew. What I really remembered from medical school and being on my obstetrics and gynecology rotation is that birth never fully goes according to plan. There are so many variables involved, and I remember the patients who were trying to control every single little detail ended up really dissatisfied with their births because they felt like it didn't follow this master plan. So really, when I was going into labor or when I was thinking about what my birth plan might be, it was really to not have a big plan. I wanted to respect my care team and do what was best for me and my baby to have a safe and healthy delivery. The main things that I knew I wanted to happen with my birth are I wanted to give birth in a hospital, ideally not at home and not on my way to the hospital. I knew that I would most likely want to have an epidural or some type of pain control during my delivery, and I knew that I wanted my husband and my mom to be there. I actually ended up undergoing an elective induction, so I chose to be induced at just over 39 weeks because although I could not control a lot of things, I knew that if I was induced that I would definitely be giving birth in a hospital, that I would have ample time to have an epidural placed if I decided that I wanted one, and that I knew I would have enough time to get my husband and my mom to the hospital when I was delivering. I got a surprising amount of pushback or even skepticism when I told people that I wanted an elective induction, and that actually surprised me, but I think it came from a good place. They thought I would be missing out on some really amazing, incredible birthing experience if I didn't let my water break naturally and have those contractions at home before going to the hospital, but none of that really appealed to me. And to me, it's not about like the birthing experience. For me, it's more about what's the end result, and that was having a healthy baby delivered. And so I knew that there was no increased risk to the baby to have an elective induction, and that made me feel more confident in pursuing that choice. Also, in the era of COVID and hospitals being understaffed, the benefit of having an elective induction was that I called the hospital on the day of my induction. They checked to make sure they had enough nurses there, enough OBGYNs on call, etc. And so I felt like going into my induction, I knew that there would be the proper support there for me. So I called the hospital around 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, and they're like, great, let's have you come in for your induction at 7 p.m. So I went and had a lovely dinner at my in-laws, and then we drove to the hospital. And then they did not actually start my induction until around 11 p.m. I really liked the idea of having an evening induction because then I could do that first part of my laboring while I was sleeping. Also, those very early stages of sort of labor are not really with you having contractions, or at least contractions that you can feel. They were just trying to open up my cervix and get it to thin out so that when the baby did decide it would come, it had a proper channel to exit my body. So we start the induction at around 11 p.m. and then really I just went to sleep. Overnight, I sort of had what felt like period cramps, but I was in no real pain whatsoever. And that sort of continued till about 11 a.m. the next day. So it was just kind of like a slow, easy start to everything. But then at around 11 a.m. the next day, I really start to have contractions, and I'm like, oh, this is what they're talking about. Like, that is uncomfortable. I was able to get up and like walk around a little bit, but then like every few minutes I was having to stop and like work through the contraction, which to me just feels like the worst crampy gas pain that you've ever experienced. At that point, they did check my cervix and they said I was at 5 centimeters. So you have to be at 10 centimeters to deliver your baby. And I thought, okay, if my contractions are this intense at only 5 centimeters, I just know myself and I'm not making it to 10 centimeters. Like, that is going to be so painful for me that it's going to give me PTSD about my delivery. And I want to be present for my delivery. I want to enjoy it. And that's when I knew that I wanted to get an epidural. So at noon, they gave me the epidural, which was not painful at all. They gave give you a little lidocaine injection to numb the skin. And then when they placed the epidural, at least for me, it was completely painless. And then I went numb about 15 minutes later. So once you have your epidural, you can't eat anything and you can't walk around. So you just have to know that once you've decided that the epidural is for you, that your mobility becomes significantly limited and you can no longer eat, which is important to know. Once I had my epidural, it was like heaven. I didn't feel anything. I could see on the strip that I was having contractions, but I couldn't feel them whatsoever. And that was incredible, honestly. At that point, they were going to give me Pitocin. That is like the real drug to get you to have the serious contractions. But my blood pressure was super low after the epidural. It was like 80/40, which if you're not a physician or a nurse or whatever, that number means nothing, but that's a pretty low blood pressure. So they had to wait till my blood pressure normalized. So at around 4 p.m., my blood pressure was high enough that they felt confident giving me the Pitocin. So that's when I got like the real kick in the pants to get the labor started. So at 4 p.m., I get my Pitocin. At 6 p.m., my OBGYN comes in to check in on me because her shift ends at 7 and she just kind of wants to like see how I'm feeling. And I'm just straight chilling. I've got that epidural in. I'm just hanging out. I'm hanging out with my husband. We're listening to good music. I was just in a very good place. And she was like, well, do you want me to check your cervix before I leave? You're probably not that much more dilated since you just got the Pitocin. And I was like, yeah, why don't you just check it for fun? And she checks it and she goes, oh, you're at 10 centimeters. Do you want to push? At that point, I literally laughed in her face because I just felt like, oh my gosh, this is not how I envisioned when you get ready to push how you feel, because I didn't feel anything. My mom had at that point driven up from the South Bay, but was hanging out at my house. So we had to call my mom and be like, hey, do you want to like get to the hospital now? Because I'm going to start to push. I only live 15 minutes from the hospital. And so I was like, well, why don't we just start pushing now? Because I know this is a process. And she was like, yeah, you're right. It can take a few hours. So like, let's get it started. So I have my first contraction and they say, push, 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 push. And I'm pushing and they go, this is going to go faster than we expected. Also, not to paint too much of a picture, but when I was initially pushing on my back, the baby's heartbeat was slowing down significantly. So they were sort of having me labor, not fully on my side, but sort of 3/4 on my side, 45-degree angle, if you will. The initial plan was to have my husband, Jonah, just sort of like sitting up at the head of the bed, not seeing everything going on down there. But because I was on my side, he was holding one of my legs. So he was like full in on the action. Sorry, babe. At the same time, he has also called my mom on his cell phone and been like, Lisa, you got to get to the hospital because she is like, things are progressing. And eventually my mom got dropped off at the hospital by my dad, was trying to get through security. It's all like very tight on a labor and delivery ward. Plus in the COVID era, she like couldn't get through security. So my husband had to like rush out of the delivery room to go find her and like bring her upstairs because Theo was just like shooting his way into this world. So my husband rushes back in. He like rushed out while I wasn't having a contraction. So he dropped my leg, got my mom, came back in, grabbed my leg. I did one more push and Theo was born. It took all of 10 minutes and 4 rounds of pushing. Also, mind you, this entire time I'm like laughing because I can't feel anything. And the nurse and the doctor are like in such shock that Theo is coming out so easily with the pushes that they're like, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. And I'm just like, great. I can't feel anything, but I'm glad it's going well down there. So from my perspective, the birth went about as smoothly as it possibly could have. I was not in pain. I was able to enjoy the birthing process. They asked if I wanted a mirror to kind of see what was going on. And I don't know why, I just envisioned it being like a little hand mirror where I would like check and look and be like, oh, okay, that's good. And then give the mirror back. No, they bring in this like 3 to 5 foot tall mirror. It's like I'm in a dressing room and it's like a full view of everything. And initially I was like horrified. It's like, I don't need to see this. But then it actually ended up being really cool because when I was pushing, because I couldn't feel anything because of the epidural, I had some feedback. I could kind of like see what was going on. So I actually think that helped me push more effectively. So now the best part, they removed Theo, they put him up on my chest. He's not crying and everyone's like, cry, cry. Like they want him to cry, of course, because that means he can breathe and that he's okay. Because when he initially came out, he had the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, which was probably why his heart rate was going down when I was laboring fully on my back. And when he let out that little cry, making me emotional, I lost it. That is when I knew like my life is going to be so much better because I have this new, beautiful baby, my son, in my life. I will cherish those first few moments with Theo like no other. It was just such a beautiful moment. My husband was there, my mom was there. Of course, I would have loved to have more of my family there, but because of COVID, I was only allowed 2 people in the delivery room. We took photos. He was breastfeeding. I was starving, so my husband also brought me a burrito. So I have like Theo breastfeeding on one side, burrito in the other, like food for baby, food for mama. It was just such a special hour after he was born. And then after an hour or two, they moved me over to the postpartum side where I spent the night in the hospital and kind of all of the next day. Because I was doing really well postpartum, I didn't have any tears, I wasn't bleeding, I felt good, I was able to get up and walk around, etc. They let us leave 24 hours after my birth. So we did not spend a lot of time in the hospital. I think that if I did not have my mom coming to stay with me the week after my birth, I probably would have elected to stay another day in the hospital just to recover a little bit more and have a little bit more support. But because I knew I had so much support coming to me at home, I felt okay going home just 24 hours after my delivery. Overall, I felt like I was really prepared for my delivery. I used almost everything I brought in my hospital bag. I got a lot of slack for bringing like my laptop and things like that, but it was more for when I was getting induced. Getting induced can take 24, 48, 72 hours sometimes. So that's why I wanted to have my computer. And it wasn't to do work, it was more to watch TV, which I did. I watched like 10 episodes of Project Runway. One thing I would have brought more of was food. So I only live 15 minutes from the hospital and my family was able to bring me more food. But if you live further from the hospital or you don't have outside support or someone to go and get you food, it's really nice to have a lot of not just snacks, but something more substantial like a sandwich or something like that. Because worst case scenario is you don't eat it, but you don't want to be stuck in the hospital hungry. It also might not be a bad idea to bring another bag, like a recyclable shopping bag or something like that, because the hospital like really loaded me up on supplies when I was leaving and I had nothing to carry them in. So again, I had my family bring me a bag, but things like diapers and little pads to wear and ice packs and nipple cream and all these things, they want to give them to you. And I think it's a really nice thing to have those first couple days because I was not as prepared at home as I should have been. Like I needed more diapers, I needed more things to support myself postpartum. And so the fact that they were able to give me some things to use for the first few days and I was able to carry them home with me was very nice. Let them give you things. So now I've been back home with Theo for several weeks. If you follow me on Instagram, you've been getting more live updates, but it has been such a special time. My parents live about an hour away from us, so they've been up to stay with us several times. My in-laws live just a few minutes from us, so they've been over a lot. It's been quite the family affair, but in the best way. They're here to support me. They're here to hang out with Theo. I just feel like this is such a special time that I never could have imagined could be so beautiful. Also could not have imagined would be so challenging. I think motherhood is really humbling. I think for me, the hardest thing is the lack of sleep. That's just something that I don't know if I'll ever get used to, but at the same time, you wake up in the middle of the night and you see the most precious, beautiful head that you've ever laid your eyes on, and then it's all okay. I think I have finally accumulated all of the strategies for changing a diaper without having my son pee directly on me or pee into his own face, which he did like his third or fourth day of life, and I just felt horrible because he essentially waterboarded himself, but you know, we're learning. One of my favorite patients who is a grandmother told me when I was getting ready to go on maternity leave, you will not understand how much your mom loves you until you have your own child. And I feel that so deeply. I have such a unique and new respect for both of my parents after becoming a parent myself. And it is such a special bond, such a special experience. Motherhood is much more enriching than I expected it to be. And that kind of can sound cold. Like, what did you expect? Like, didn't you know what you were getting yourself into? But that change in your mental state, whatever happens biologically when you have a baby, is unparalleled. The amount of love I feel for this kid is disgusting in the best way. I would do anything for him. And so I'm so happy. I am in a great place. I feel super blessed that my birth went as well as it did. I cannot wait to see what else is to come. If you want to meet Theo, come hang out with me on Instagram. I post a lot more live updates there, as well as baby skincare tips and motherhood tips and things like that. I would love to hear about your birth story, so put it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.